A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, Greg Bondar leads Every Home for Christ in Australia. He's also the national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia. He's just back from a visit to India and Sri Lanka. In his role as the Australian leader of Every Home for Christ, Greg Bondar, a special welcome back to 2020.
Oh, delighted to be with you, Neil.
Greg, I've mentioned this, and I received a email alert around these sorts of issues just recently. There's a well-publicised massacre of Christians planned on the 1st of March in India. You're just back from India. I guess fill us in on when you got news and how you were feeling. I think you were in India when you got news this was coming.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. Look, I was in India as a guest of Every Home for Christ in India as well. And interestingly, Neil, I was out at rural villages where I was a guest preacher, and I have to tell you, Neil, it's just such a joy to be out there in the rural villages and preaching to these communities that have really don't even have chairs to sit on. They sit on mats. And to cut a long story short, Neil, here I am in India outside of Chennai, about 100 kilometres outside of Chennai, and I get this email from Vishal Magawaldi. As you well know him, he's a very outspoken Christian commentator as well, and he sent me an email, and to you and to various other people, saying there is a planned massacre of Christians for March the 1st. Now, here I am in India, Neil, and I have to tell you, I was quite frankly shocked and put on alert, and dare I say, Neil, scared to hear this message, Neil.
Well, March the 1st, I mean, it could have been one of the dates you were there in India and you might have then feared for your life. But there's 3 towns and cities that have been mentioned in the letter that the uprising is planned for. My suspicion is, though, every Christian will be under some sort of vulnerable risk on the 1st of March because that sort of thing is really quite challenging. But they're sizable cities where they're primarily Christian populations.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. Now, I have to stress that I've just found out, having been there, that various states within India are either pro-Christian or anti-Christian, and this particular town, Chhattisgarh, is where it's planned to be happening, one of the biggest cities of this massacre, which is only about a day away from, or less than a day away from where I was staying in Chennai. And it is planned on the March the 1st. Now, Neil, believe it, it's my birthday, March the 1st. But here I'm in India, and I'm quite literally panicking. Do you know, Neil, as a Christian, the first thing that came to my mind was I was thinking of Peter, who denied Christ for 3 times, as you would recall. And I was just thinking to myself, what would I do, Neil, if all of a sudden I was approached and say, oh, you're a Christian? And I said to myself, what do I do? Do I deny my faith or do I say I am, irrespective of what might happen to me? But look, that aside, Neil, these are planned to go ahead. Vishal Magawaldi has written to the PM, Prime Minister Modi, and saying that he has to intervene to stop the proposed killing, the maiming, and to violate Christians within these 3 towns that you mentioned now, here it is, Neil, with 5,000 militia people going out on the 1st of March. Unbelievable, no?
Yes, and called to kill, maim and violate Christians, which, as I understand it, a little bit extra research, means raping women.
Yep.
And those are challenging things. Now, just you might, having just been to India and just come back, the thoughts of what we call Hindutva, the Hindu nationalism. The Modi government has been pushing this, and that seems to be fueling this hatred against Christians. But Hindu nationalism and certain conversion laws, which make it very hard for anyone in the Hindu upbringing to be converted to Christianity. But this hatred against Christians is something that's been perpetuated there. What do you understand? What did you pick up from the atmosphere when you were in India? Yeah,
interestingly, Neil, look, where I stayed in the state of Chennai, I guess, what happened there is they are more tolerant of Christianity. Now, Neil, listen to this. I was preaching at a local church in Chennai. I had over nearly 200 people there, but the story here is, Neil, that when I finished my message and preaching on the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19, Neil, the local pastor said, Greg would like to, do a blessing of one or two of you if you want to be blessed because of this latest news that was advertised. Neil, I had 150 people that I personally laid my hand on and blessed them, which I could not believe, because they were in fear that that sort of threat could come down to their district as well.
You know, this is hard for ordinary Aussies to comprehend if you don't know anything about Hindu religion. But one of the things that's being used to stir up a level of resentment and even hatred of Christians is the fact that in Christian villages they eat cows because cows are sacred in Hindu culture, and we like to think of having a nice steak, but that's actually very offensive to Hindus. Do you have any insight there?
I absolutely do, Neil. Interestingly, when I was going out to these rural villages and inspecting the various humanitarian programs that Every Home for Christ was doing, we got build schools, child sponsorship, we provide equipment, sewing machines. Neil, I have to tell you, the cows are everywhere. I was getting out of my hotel, believe it or not, and just 30 metres down, there's a cow. And they're just allowed to roam. You don't touch them. You keep them sacred. And it is highly, highly part of their cultural aspect that the cows are not to be messed with. So very much a tradition that's ongoing, Neil. And it surprised me that they were literally everywhere, even in the cities, Neil.
Now, Vishal Mangalwadi has sent a letter to the Indian Prime Minister Modi and asking for his intervention here. Was there anything mentioned about possibilities that might come from Modi to intervene, or even is that a possibility that he might, because it seems to be that mobs in Hindu India tend not to necessarily listen to what others are saying. Did you pick up anything there?
Yeah, I did, Neil. Look, in actual fact, Vishal Mangalwadi wrote not only to the Prime Minister, but he also wrote, believe it or not, to various other state ministers within India. So he's asked each of the state ministers to also intervene and stop this from happening. But in particular, what's happening is that, according to Vishal, that the state ministers would not intervene and support the militia in their act to violate Christians. I mean, Neil, that is unbelievable when you think of a modern, it's 2025, we're meant to have religious freedom, we're meant to have the ability to express our faith, but here in India, they're saying that they will not stop this from occurring, and that's really disturbing. In particular, I think Vishal also wrote to Donald Trump, the president of the USA, to ask him to intervene as well. So, Neil, this is a big issue, and I'm just praying that this will not occur, Neil.
And what appears to be the case is that Donald Trump didn't raise this with Narendra Modi at their recent meeting, and there might be some concern around that. Well, we might not know what was said behind closed doors, and maybe there was something said, but certainly I don't think it's been reported. Those three cities and towns that were named, Bishrampur, I did a little research. It's around about 100,000 population. Janakpur has a 200,000 population, and there's a smaller town, Ganesaspur. It's a smaller town. I think it's probably only about 15,000, 16,000, but who knows how old my figures were that I did that little bit of research. But that's a substantial number of people that come under threat here.
Absolutely, Neil. And there's another, the actual Chhattisgarh is the region where they're planning this, and there's a large-scale anti-violence is being planned. Now, this has to stop. I mean, we're being violated, where Christians are under attack, and people keep saying to me, you're joking, Greg. They are under attack within Australia, within India, within globally, and we have to, as Christians, make a stand in the sense that we have to continue to pray. And I'm asking, Neil, everybody to write to the PM of India, Mr. Modi, through the Embassy of Australia, but more importantly also write to the PM Albanese and get him to do something to speak out against these, planned attacks on Christians. Now, because this can't be allowed to happen.
And for ordinary ones of us who feel like we are not empowered to do too much, writing a letter might be one way we can do something practical, but we can be on our knees. The prayers for our brothers and sisters in Christ, that we might stand in solidarity with in India. What's your encouragement here for listeners?
Oh, absolutely. Look, the power of prayer, Neil, is wonderful, and it will work. And I have to tell you, in India, we've prayed there for about an hour or so with all the pastors and all the congregation there to ensure that Christianity would be protected. So, power of prayer, Neil, don't underestimate it, and it's a true answer, really.
Okay, and it's given weight. Now, we're talking about this not because it's just a rumour, but because from the letter that Vishal Mangalwadi sent, he says the Hindu Religious Parliament called for 1,000 Hindus to come out and slay those who slay our mother cow.
Yep.
Do not ask for the death penalty for cow slayers. Kill them and ask for the death penalty for yourselves. Do not wait for the law to act. That's some wording from the Hindu Religious Parliament. So, certainly is a very violent act that's being called for, and so where that 5,000 comes from, I'm not sure, but it's 5,000 Hindus likely to be raising up against Christians on the 1st of March. So here we are, 25th of April. We're talking about next weekend, basically. And we might have to have a little bit of a chat about that and monitor those things along as they go. Hey, you also went from India to Sri Lanka, and you had some connection there with church leaders. How did that go?
Oh, Neil, it was wonderful. Again, we have some very good projects in Sri Lanka. We support disadvantaged homeless children there, and we look after them because, quite frankly, it's appalling. Some of those children only have one meal a day, and it was good for us to be there. Well, I was there, and we fed them, and we had a number of meetings with the children because they were just so delightful. At one school, Neil, in Sri Lanka, we gave out 300 school bags to children that didn't even have anywhere to keep their books, so they were really delighted to get their backpacks. But Neil, more importantly, I met with over 60 pastors in Sri Lanka on a one-day conference called Disciple Making, and Neil, the feedback from those pastors, it's unbelievable. And again, we've got a country that is predominantly, based on religion that is non-Christian. The Protestant churches there are, basically Anglican, Methodist, Baptist, and Salvation Army. But quite frankly, again, you're in a country where religion, in terms of Christianity, is very, very low at this stage.
So you had church leaders there and wanting to cooperate together, the mainstream churches, and from what I understand, the main churches in Sri Lanka, Anglican, Methodist, Baptist and Salvation Army. But of course there are other smaller independent, non-denominational churches, but they all want to work together in disciple making.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I was their guest speaker and I delivered a sermon to them. But you know what they said? They came up with a number of issues now that really is quite illuminating, because if we think about it for Australia as well, and there were three things that sort of came out of there. And the first thing was that a lot of these pastors who are independent with small churches all over Sri Lanka were saying that the mainstream churches failed to support the smaller churches in terms of discipleship making. Secondly, they were saying that, spreading the gospel in any country that is, predominantly Hindu was very difficult, or Buddhism is the official religion, by the way, followed by Hinduism, and then Islam. They were saying it's very difficult to spread the gospel without the support of the large churches. And only 7% of Sri Lankans are Christian. So, Neil, this came out from these pastors, and that sends a message to us here in Australia as well, in the sense that do the mainstream churches support the smaller, non-denominational churches in spreading the gospel and fulfilling that Great Commission, Neil?
And we know here in Australia there are some churches that are absolutely thriving, others that are suffering, and there's demographic issues and all sorts of things around the way churches conduct themselves and whether they're going woke and going broke in that sense. But, what's your impression here in Australia and this sort of cooperation? I mean, you've picked up something from Sri Lanka. Is there something we can talk about for our Australian churches that we might be encouraged by?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. I think we have to do two things here, Neil. And this is a world trend. One is that, the independent and non-denominational churches are growing. And I think there needs to be cooperation between the mainstream churches, in some areas declining, and we need to get these mainstream churches to stop being isolationist and, in fact, territorial gatekeepers. In other words, what I'm saying here is they're very protective of their patch, their turf, and we need to open up the churches to be more cooperative with the smaller churches, even the home churches, Neil. And I think we've got to do that. Now, let's not be so territorial in our church discipleship making now.
Perhaps maintaining our distinctives, different denominations, but finding some common ground where you can work together. And you know what? Disciple making, that's one of the things that we can all have in common, and maybe we disciple in slightly different ways, but we're all coming back to those principles that we glean from the Scriptures and how to live a Christian life in a very secularized nation that we are. Hey, Every Home for Christ, you've got this hat firmly on your head, and great to be able to catch up on some of the things that you're doing as you're travelling. We talked to you about visits to the South Pacific Islands more recently, and now India and Sri Lanka. What sort of things you got coming up? What's on the agenda?
Oh, look, Neil, very importantly, please, if I can get all your listeners to, in Sydney in particular, we have a marriage summit, Neil, because, marriage from a biblical perspective is very much under publicised, and we need to get back to the foundations of marriage. So I've got a husband and wife pastors coming out from the Philippines to talk to us about the biblical marriage. They actually rated very high on the 700 Club Asia, where they had their testimonies replayed by, in the sense that they had their testimony of how the love of Jesus changed their life. So they're going to be here in Sydney on Saturday the 22nd of March at a place called the Point Church Anglican, which is in Concord. If anybody lives in around that region, please contact us and come along. But send the young ones, the old ones, the soon-to-be married, because really biblical marriage, Neil, has to be redefined, because I think we've lost a lot of the foundations of what a true marriage is from a biblical perspective. Okay,
and some details, no doubt, on the website. But significant year this year for Every Home for Christ. 50th anniversary. You've got some celebrations planned too?
Yeah, Neil, for 50 years, Every Home for Christ has been carrying Christ to everyone, everywhere, and every generation. Now, I'm staggered, Neil, that in 1975, Eric Litch, whom you know of, signed an agreement with the Every Home for Christ International to say, yes, we will become part of the network. And for 50 years we've been doing that, and I'm staggered that we've maintained that momentum to be able to do this mission work. So on the 12th of April, Neil, we will be having a 50th anniversary lunch here in Sydney again. If anybody's available, go to our website. But, Neil, isn't it wonderful that you can be 50 years old and be continuing to carry Christ to everyone on a national level? And I'm really delighted to hear that we've been doing that now for 50 years now.
It is a great milestone, and for listeners to follow through on some of the things we've been talking about today, no doubt there'll be some information and links on the Every Home for Christ website, everyhomeforchrist.org.au. And no doubt when it comes to some of the big issues that we're facing, and, when we're talking about Australian response to the threat against Indians, maybe that's something that crosses over into your christianvoiceaustralia.com.au, the hat that you wear as the national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia. Thank you so much for another great update today, Greg Bondar.
Oh, delighted, Neil, and God bless you and your listeners.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.